Welcome to this FiOS 1 News special presentation, Asked and Answered, an exclusive interview with New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. I'm Jen Rogers. On January 16th, Democrat Phil Murphy became the 56th governor in New Jersey history and was immediately confronted with both serious concerns and critical policy choices. Among them, mounting deficits and pension costs, prompting Murphy to call for more than $1.5 billion in new taxes and an increase in the state's property tax cap. Murphy must also navigate a divided public on a host of social issues, ranging from the state's medical marijuana program to how best to tackle the ongoing opioid crisis. And in the wake of the high school massacre in Florida, the state's gun laws. Recently, I sat down with Governor Murphy to discuss these issues and more. We begin with taxes.
The fiscal surprises that we found in transition in our early days have been more negative than positive. But I'm a huge believer in this state, and I believe all of our challenges and legacy issues have been man-made, which gives me great optimism because that means that man-made action can correct them. And I'm incredibly optimistic about that. I think if we get back to doing the things that we used to do really well, which is investing in the middle class, investing in the dreams of those who look up and aspire to get into the middle class, how I grew up actually, and get back to basics of investing in education and infrastructure and reclaiming the economies that we used to dominate, like innovation and infrastructure, we're going to get rocking again sooner than we think. And we can't do it overnight. It'll be a little bit of a grind, but we're going to get there.
Let's dig in on the budget right now, because that's really going to help you figure out how to make some of these dreams come true that you're talking about, especially with education. But you need to raise more revenue, and we all know what's happening on a national level. Given that New Jersey residents are going to get hit with this new $10,000 limit on state and local tax deductions, it is not a great time to raise taxes.
Yes and no. The last thing we're going to do is raise taxes on the middle class. In fact, our budget is a historic investment into the middle class and again into the dreams of those who want to get there. We're going to ask our very wealthiest among us, who have had a very good ride for the past 8 years, and thanks to President Trump and the Republicans in Congress, will continue to have a good ride. We're going to ask them to pay a little bit more. We're going to ask corporations to do some good housekeeping, nothing radical, tune some things up that a lot of other states have already done. We're going to undo tax gimmicks. My predecessor cut 3/8 of a cent on the sales tax, not because it was good policy, but because he didn't want to say he raised taxes. Well, you know what? That's not a good enough reason. We're going to reset that and deliver a lot more to the family that pays that. So I think it is a tax equity, tax fairness mindset. I'd also say this: we're not taking the Trump state and local tax deduction law lying down.
What are you doing there?
Yeah, so we're fighting it with other states. We're fighting the constitutionality of it. We think it's unconstitutional. It's double taxation. We're trying to come up with creative solutions. So we're trying to do, and other states are doing this as well, although we've been leading on the notion of taking what used to be a property tax payment and making it a charitable deduction payment. We think there's plenty of IRS precedent for that. We raised the cap on deductibility from $10,000 in the state to $15,000. That brings in another over 500,000 property taxpayers. We got to grow the economy. That's the surest way to get the property tax crisis under control. 53% of anyone's property tax bill on average in the state is for public education. Last administration underfunded the school funding formula by over $9 billion. We've started a process to fully fund that. We're going to hire a shared services czar so we can find opportunities across communities. So there's not one, I say all that because there's not that one magic bullet, but there are a whole series of steps that we're pursuing.
So a series of steps. Sadly, no magic bullet. But what happens, is there a backup plan? Because you have an $8.7 billion structural gap if the legislature doesn't approve tax increases. What do you do then?
So as you said, we put out our budget about a month ago. So far, so good. I'm optimistic that we're going to have common ground with the legislature. We all, I think, share the passion to reinvest in the middle class in this state. to reignite those economies I referred to. I mean, this is literally provable. We were Silicon Valley before there was a Silicon Valley. There's no reason we can't reignite with the top 3 public school systems in the country, great institutions of higher education. And then infrastructure, we've got a location that 49 other states would die to swap in for. So we all see that similarly, that there's huge opportunity, particularly through the lens of the middle class. And I think the revenue sources that we've suggested are common sense. Undoing gimmicks. The wealthiest among us have done really well. Let's ask them to pay a little bit more. Not class warfare. This is tax equity. I'm pretty confident we're going to get up to the right place here.
Let's talk about transportation. New Jersey commuters are very eager to hear anything on the Gateway Tunnel project. The reports are that $540 million was secured out of the federal spending bill. Then there is this pot the New Jersey governor and the New York governor have. But the Trump administration has insisted that there is nothing in the spending bill that guarantees Gateway funding. Do you think the administration will move to block it? What guarantees can you give commuters here in New Jersey that this is actually going to happen?
Yeah, it will happen. A friend of mine says this tunnel is going to get built one way or the other. One way with pre-planning and in the right way, or because we've had a horrible disaster, and God forbid it's the former and not the latter. It's a national security matter. It's a national economic imperative. 20% of the GDP of the country is associated with that tunnel. We haven't had a tunnel under the Hudson built in over 100 years.
Yeah, I mean, that just shows you how long it has taken, and we have been waiting so long.
And by the way, this is not, Jen, one party or another. Both the congressional delegations up and down the East Coast, both sides of the aisle, are unanimously supportive of this. So I believe at the end of the day, the gamesmanship will disappear, and we'll get the funding we need. Your math is absolutely consistent with ours. There's a significant amount of seed money in this omnibus bill. That money, based on everything we see, will stay in there. It'll get put to good use. Cooler heads will prevail. Folks will realize, you know what, this is not just a necessity, but a great investment in our economy. I'm optimistic we'll get there.
So you're not worried that the Trump administration will block it, that you don't wait for some Trump tweet on this topic?
Well, God forbid. I mean, Lord help us. I mean, we're not standing back and putting our feet up. Let's put it that way. I was very troubled when the president about a month or so ago started to become opposed to this. I had seen him and spoken to him briefly, once on the phone and once in person. He's a New York guy. He's got a lot of interest in New Jersey. This is not abstract for him, which is why I think at the end of the day we'll get there. But I would say to folks watching this, we're not taking one speck of this for granted.
There's much more of my conversation with Governor Murphy still ahead. We'll talk about the opioid epidemic and what's now being done, plus the role the governor believes medical marijuana can play to stem the crisis. And then, in the wake of the Parkland massacre and the youth movement for common sense gun control, what specific steps are being taken to reduce gun violence in the Garden State? You're watching a FiOS 1 News special report, Asked and Answered, an exclusive interview with New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. Welcome back. Our exclusive interview with Governor Phil Murphy continues now with how New Jersey is confronting the opioid crisis.
Something that has become less and less abstract for all of us is the opioid crisis.
You bet.
Over 40,000 Americans lost their lives to the epidemic in 2016. A White House report last fall said that the epidemic had cost the U.S. economy more than $500 billion in 2015. Really, no state has been untouched. And I'm wondering, you've traveled around this state so much, what's the human face for you?
Oh, it's up and down the state. It's in every one of our 21 counties. And I have to say, it was an epidemic in our urban communities, particularly communities of color, long before it got the attention that it's gotten now, but it's everywhere in the state. We asked our relevant cabinet leadership, our front office, to prioritize this, to get at that immediately in terms of what's the right package of policy to put up against this to break the back of it. We announced a $100 million investment program a couple of weeks ago. It's got a whole bunch of different elements to it. A lot of it's distributed, outpatient focused. A lot of it's contextual, so getting homelessness and joblessness, which are contributing factors, into a better place. A good amount of our investment is in data. We've made a lot of decisions based on our gut instincts on the opioid crisis. I'm more of a Moneyball guy. We want to know exactly what's working, what isn't working. The data in other healthcare fields are 21st century. They're not in this particular case. We're also big believers that medical marijuana, which has been gummed up in our state for too long, unleashing that, as we have recently announced that we'll do, will become a much more viable alternative to the opioids that folks get hooked on. We've got family members right now going through medical situations. These opioids get dispensed like M&Ms. It's an outrage. So finding alternatives to that. So this is an all-in, whole-of-government approach. It's an absolute crisis in our state. It is across the country. As you suggested, it's not only the awful loss of life, but it's the impact on the broader society. We must break the back of this. We're committed to doing that.
You brought up marijuana and legalizing that is something that you've talked about before. Do you think that there's any sort of mixed message pushing for that, given what's happening with the opioid crisis?
I don't, actually. I think it's, in fact, quite consistent. So there's two pieces of this. One is the medical marijuana piece. We were one of the first states to have a medical marijuana regime. It was gummed up for the past 8 years. There's only 17 or 18,000 participants. States that have come to it much later than ours with similar populations, Michigan comes to mind, 230,000 people. The list of maladies in those other states that allow you to participate much longer. Stigma associated with the physicians who prescribe it, non-existent. We've got to break the back of all of that. It is clear through many studies that this is an alternative, not a stepping stone, as some would lead you to believe, but an alternative to the opioid path. And frankly, adult use marijuana, legalizing that, we have two choices. Leave that in the hands of the bad guys, leave our kids exposed, don't regulate it, don't take the taxation. We have an awful white, non-white gap of persons incarcerated in our state. It's the worst in the country. A lot of that's contributed by low-end drug offenses. We can either stay with that or we can legalize it, put a framework around it, protect our kids, crack the back of that social justice injustice. I'm taking door number 2.
And you actually have included $60 million in tax revenue for legalizing marijuana this year. And I think there are a lot of people that thought this was maybe more of a slam dunk to get legalized. You have a Democratic legislature,
Yep.
Public opinion polls seem to be with you. Why does it seem more of a challenge?
I never thought it was a slam dunk, I should say. And $60 million in our budget, which is absolutely the number, is a modest amount relative to any expectation. Listen, I've got 4 kids under the age of 21. I did not come to this myself overnight. This is not an easy one. I don't blame others for trying to reach for other potential solutions and having trouble with this. There's a lot of folks who talk about decriminalization. I can understand why they get there. It's the wrong medicine. Decriminalization leaves it in the hands of the bad guys, leaves our kids exposed. We don't regulate it, we don't tax it, and we don't break the back of the social justice awful reality that you've got persons of color incarcerated at a dramatically higher rate. So it takes, this is one that you really got to kick around, turn over, debate, discuss. I'm confident that folks at the end of the day, when they really look at all dimensions, they'll get there.
Is the end of the day this year?
I believe so, yes. I mean, the date that we have targeted is January 1 of 2019, which is the midpoint in our fiscal year.
Coming up, taking aim at gun violence. The governor talks about what he wants and why he says monthly reports by state police on gun offenses will make a big difference. That and more as Asked and Answered, an exclusive interview with New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy returns. Governor Murphy has signed an executive order making data on gun violence more accessible to the public. The so-called name and shame order will cite the origin of a gun involved in a crime. Here's more on his gun control efforts.
Let's talk about guns. You recently signed an executive order making gun violence data more accessible, the so-called name and shame.
Yep.
And I'm curious, it cites the origin of a gun involved in a crime. In some ways, it seems important, but maybe a little bit cosmetic in terms of stopping guns from coming on the iron pipeline up I-95. How does it actually stop gun trafficking?
So we have a little bit of a rule of thumb. We don't do things just because they look good. So we're hoping we make our calls based on facts and science. So here's the reality. New Jersey has really strong gun laws. I'm committed to making them stronger. I've got my pen ready to go. One chamber's passed a whole series of laws. We're waiting on the next to get theirs passed. I hope sooner than later I'll sign those laws, so we'll tighten up. Secondly, we're going to keep Congress's feet to the fire. And I'm incredibly inspired by the young generation. We have failed to break the back of the gun lobby. I believe that generation will. Thirdly, in the meantime, we're a state with over 80% of the gun crimes in New Jersey are committed with guns that come in from out of state. So as good as our gun laws are, we're beholden to, as you mentioned, the I-95 or whatever other corridor. Our Attorney General broke, for instance, a gun ring in Camden that had emanated from Ohio. And so what are we doing? One is we formed the States for Gun Safety. There are 7 of us. It was an idea that we came up with a year or 2 ago. We're sharing data. We're going to do gun safety research. That's in our budget. We think we can be stronger if we do it together. Again, this is in the absence, I hope still, that better day of national gun legislation. But until then, this coalition will matter. And as you mentioned, the database. We're going to make all information, either monthly or quarterly, depending on the data, available for everybody to see. And I think I want our citizens to see where those guns are coming from. And when someone asked me last week, well, how could you see an action coming from that? I was standing beside a 14-year-old young woman from Asbury Park, an incredibly talented young lady whose family had been touched and impacted by gun violence. I said, you know what? I wouldn't be upset as long as parents and teachers, and it was done safely, if they looked at that data and they said, you know, we're going to get on a bus and we're going to drive to the Capitol in the steps of that state house, wherever it might be. I'll pick South Carolina as an example, and say, you know what, keep your guns out of my state.
So you're hoping to create more activists out of this?
100%.
Because there's nothing, I mean, your hands in some ways are sort of tied. You have, I mean, look, the legislature here, and Governor Chris Christie vetoed about a dozen gun control measures
all
earlier.
of which we'll sign.
You will go ahead
Absolutely.
with those. So Democrats hope to strengthen under you, but I mean, the states around you, if they don't do anything.
You're only as good as, particularly if you've got over 80% of the guns coming in from out of state, which is why we hope, A, they'll join our gun safety state coalition, and or B, they're going to get the message loud and clear from New Jersey, keep your guns out of here, and we're going to keep that at a fever pitch until we see something change.
Up next on Asked and Answered, an exclusive interview with Governor Phil Murphy, the governor's take on Amazon and why he believes it should choose Newark for its new headquarters. The city that Amazon chooses for its second headquarters will no doubt be transformed, and Newark is on the list of finalists. Here's why Governor Murphy believes the Brick City is the place for the retail giant.
So one thing for sure, a lot of governors would like to get in their state is Amazon. Yeah. Amazon has their big HQ2 measure where they're going to put their headquarters, their second headquarters. Newark is in the running. Yep. How far would you go to get Amazon here? How important a deal would that be? Do you think you have a shot?
Oh, I think we've absolutely got a shot. I think Newark's case is almost it's almost ideal for Amazon, and we will. This is a once in a generation, once in a lifetime opportunity. 50,000 jobs and all that goes with that. It's an extraordinary opportunity. There are 20 contenders, and so I think Newark's got it's got a lot of what we think it takes. It's got extraordinary location, infrastructure. We have, again, among the most talented workforces in the country, if not the world, great public education, an innovation economy genealogy, so it's not new to us. And it's also a city where I think Amazon can look at it and say, you know what, we can transform Newark and greater Newark. And so we're working really hard. When you got 1 in 20, you can't guarantee anything, but we've got a really good case.
Better than being left out.
100%.
As a former businessman and now politician, what do you think about Donald Trump tweeting at Amazon?
Oh, it's ridiculous, like a lot of other things he does. I don't understand. I don't understand this guy most days. I want to always try to find common ground. I respect the office of the presidency, but I have to tell you, I wake up every day finding myself battling his administration, whether it's on immigration policy or the environment or guns, or you fill in the blank. And there's no reason for class warfare. Even when we say the wealthiest among us need to pay a little bit more in their fair share, or corporations have to tune up and do some good hygiene, that doesn't mean we don't want them. And I think what he does in most cases is a lot of noise with very little impact positive.
Before we let you go, what's your favorite part of the last 3 months here?
Without question, because I had lunch with a colleague in a diner yesterday, and 2 people walked up with their own stories. What we are doing is making a difference in people's lives. It so happened one of the stories was related to medical marijuana. This is somebody who had PTSD, and that's a malady that needs to be much more fully embraced in that particular case, but we are making a difference. It's extraordinarily humbling, but it's real. You sign an executive order, you sign a piece of legislation, you put a budget together, it affects lives, and it's incredibly rewarding and humbling.
Well, that does it for this FiOS 1 News special report, Asked and Answered, an exclusive interview with New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jen Rogers. Good night.